Alexander and Jesus. Let's look at a comparative analysis of both of these great men of history, Alexander the Great and Jesus Christ. First of all, let's look at the prophetic nature of the two personalities. As we know, the whole Bible talks about Jesus from book Genesis to the last book of Revelation. However, it's also very interesting and fascinating to note that even Alexander the Great has been mentioned in the Bible, especially in the book of Daniel and Zechariah and even Ezekiel. In the book of Daniel, he is mentioned as a mighty king, a ruler who would conquer a lot of land, but as he rose, so shall his fall follow him. In Daniel 11, we have from verse 3 onwards, it says, "Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the four winds of heaven." And then further talks more about the conquest of Alexander. We also find the prophecies about Alexander in the book of Zechariah, especially in chapter 9. From verse 3 to verse 6, it talks about how Alexander would conquer Tyre and also other countries, nations, including Gaza, and further how his conquest and rule would extend. In the same chapter, from chapter 9 onwards, we hear about Jesus Christ. So it's very interesting and fascinating to note that in the Bible there is mention of Alexander, and at certain spots it's both Alexander and Jesus in the same chapters. So here we have the prophetic nature of both men as mentioned in the Bible. Of course, we know about Jesus. The whole Bible is about Jesus from Genesis to the last book of Revelation. It's all about Jesus. And where we find Alexander, sometimes we find Jesus along with Alexander, as we find in Zechariah chapter 9. Further moving on, we come to the ethnicity and divinity. There is a theory about Alexander's birth that, like Jesus' birth, he had dual parentage, as Jesus had earthly parentage, Mother Mary, and Joseph, though Joseph was not Jesus' biological father, and as we believe, even Mary was not biological mother of Jesus, but in a sense she was, as she bore Jesus in her womb. Alexander, on the other hand, was from Macedonia, and he wasn't a Greek, as normally is understood or believed to be, and he was polytheist, considered to be a demigod. He is believed to have dual parentage as well. And how is that? Well, it's believed that Alexander was a son of the kings and the ancient gods. Just as Jesus has dual parentage, the earthly parent, Mother Mary, and Joseph, so does Alexander claim to have double or dual parentage. The earthly father of Alexander, as we all know, father was King Philip of Macedon, and his mother was one of the 12 Olympians, Hera Olympian, and she was also daughter of a king. However, it's believed that she also had a mythological parentage or heritage that falls in the realm of the Greek mythology. Especially, uh, she was the daughter of Achilles, who is the hero of the Trojan War, as mentioned in Iliad, written by Homer. So that was from the mother side. Mother being one of the 12 Olympians, goddesses, daughter of Achilles, and Achilles is one of the great heroes, as we see in Iliad, written by Homer. On the other hand, the father, the godfather or the mythological father of Alexander was Hercules and Zeus. So we can trace the the lineage of Alexander from earthly point of view, King Philip and Hera, and from the divine or from mythological perspective, it's Hera, one of the 12 Olympians, and Achilles, the war hero of the Trojan War, as we see his story in Homer's Iliad. Next, we come to the youth and education of Alexander and Jesus. King Philip sent his young son Alexander to study with, with Aristotle. And as we know, Aristotle was the student of Plato, and Plato the student of Socrates. So here we see that Alexander has a very rich and powerful educational background. On the other hand, we have Jesus. We do not know much about Jesus' youth. In the Bible, there is only a few texts that speak about the youthful life of Jesus. One of the famous ones, as we know, is Luke 2:39 to 52, where we see Jesus going to the temple and discussing or having conversation with the rabbis and the Pharisees. And here we see, whereas Alexander was sent to get education at the age of 13, Jesus, about around the same age, was teaching the rabbis and the teachers of the law in the temple. Next, we move on to marriage. And of course, we know that Jesus never got married. However, Alexander married 3 times. His first wife was Roxana of Bactria, which is called, in present days, is called Afghanistan. And this was the land that Alexander captured in 327. Bactria was not only Afghanistan, but it was also extended or spread up to the borders of the modern day Iran. And so Ragzona in Urdu or in Persian called Ruxana was Alexander's first wife. Moving on further, we see how Alexander and Jesus traveled in their lifetime. Alexander, as we know, by nature of his adventures and travels and wars, traveled extensively. The total number of miles that Alexander traveled is said to be more than 22,000 miles. And during these travels, he conquered around 3,000 miles of area where he actually did battle and had wars. His kingdom is said to have spread over 2 million square miles. How about Jesus? Well, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not that of the world." He didn't come to conquer the world. Anyway, he conquered the world in a different way. However, in Isaiah 60, verse 3, we hear that all nations come to you. So although Jesus didn't go to all the nations came to him. All the nations come to him. About the travel of Jesus, well, it's said that Jesus merely walked 2,000 to 3,000 miles throughout his ministry. Army. How big army did Alexander have, and how big army did Jesus have? Well, Alexander had an army, a huge army of around 30 to 50,000 brave, strong men. And he had around 7,000 horses that were part of his army. 30,000 men were just the infantry. And it's said that when he crossed over to India, He had about 120,000 men as his entourage. Not all of these were soldiers, of course, but sort of paramilitary entourage. And especially it's said that at Guatemala, Iraq, he had around 40,000 infantry and 5,000 balisters and 7,000 cavalry, along with thousands of horses. Well, about Jesus, Jesus had the smallest army of the history, whereas Alexander had almost the largest army of the history. Jesus, on the other hand, the smallest army of the history. His army consisted of only 12 men, out of which there were 4 fishermen. And these 4 men or soldiers, Jesus' army, went all over the world and they conquered the whole world as well. However, the fate of the soldiers of Jesus was much different than those of the army of Alexander. Well, let's look at the fate of these 12 soldiers of Jesus that conquered the whole world. Peter went to Rome and he was crucified there, and Thomas went to India and he was speared to death, and Andrew went to the land of the man-eaters, which was called as man-eaters at that time, and nowadays we call it Russia. He also went to Turkey and to Greece, and there he was crucified. Matthew went to Persia, Ethiopia, and there he was stabbed to death. Bartholomew went to Armenia and Serbia, and he was martyred there. James went to Syria, and there he was clubbed to death. Simon the Zealot was killed in Persia. Matthias, who was replaced by Judas Iscariot, went to Syria, and there he was burned to death. John was the only disciple of Jesus who died natural death, where he was exiled to the island of Patmos, and there at Patmos he finally breathed his last. Paul, though not one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, was also beheaded by Nero in Rome. So these are the 12 soldiers of Jesus conquered the whole world, um, compared to how Alexander's army conquered the world. Alexander's army is said to have conquered almost the whole world, the known world of his time. He began from Macedonia, going through Greece, Persia, Asia Minor, Egypt, and Mediterranean, went all the way past Afghanistan, almost close to the borders of China. What did Jesus conquer? Well, Jesus ordered or commissioned his disciples to go into all the world, baptizing people in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. That was the great commission of Jesus, and that is the way he conquered the world, through his 12 soldiers. How about the kingdom? Alexander's kingdom, as we have seen earlier, was spreading over kind of 2 million square miles, a huge and vast empire. As a king, he began to sweep through the whole world, and at 13 he had started engaging in military operations. By age of 30, it is said that he had almost conquered the whole world, the world that was known at his times. How about Jesus? Psalm 72 verse 8 says that during his time there shall be peace and prosperity. It's very interesting to note that the great writer John Milton, in his greatest epic, The Paradise Lost, notes that while Jesus was in this world, there was no war or big significant war anywhere going on in the world. Well, there could be smaller skirmishes here and there, but there was no major war going on anywhere in the world the time Jesus spent in this world. This takes us back to Psalm 72:8, which says, "There shall be peace and prosperity in his times." Daniel 7:14 says that his dominion is an everlasting dominion, unlike the dominion of Alexander. Zechariah 9:10 says his kingdom will be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. Of course, this is not supposed to be the physical kingdom, but the kingdom of the gospel, that the gospel will reach all the ends of the earth. John 18:36, Jesus clearly claims or proclaims that my kingdom is not of this world. How about the influence of both Alexander and Jesus? Well, for 300 years, the Greek influence reigned over the whole world. The Greeks went conquering from land to land and took over almost the whole world by a storm. How about the influence of Jesus? Well, even now, over 29 or 30% of the world population is a believer in Jesus. And as we read in Philippians 2:10-11, says that every knee shall bow before Jesus. Every knee in heaven or on earth shall bow before Jesus and confess that Jesus Christ is the Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That is the influence of Jesus. How about death? Well, Alexander died around age 33, as did Jesus. Alexander died in Babylon, and there are conspiracy theories about the death of Alexander. Some believe that he died of alcohol, overuse of alcohol. Some think that he had a fever. Others think that he was poisoned. Whatever the cause, he died at a very young age of around 33. Alexander wished to be buried in Siwa, which is 348 miles from modern-day Cairo, towards the borders of Libya. And however, since his body was moved from place to place, later on it was believed that he was buried at Memphis near Babylon. However, finally it's said that Alexander is resting in his final resting place, which is Alexander Sarcophagus. Something interesting happened here. When Alexander died, his body was hijacked or kidnapped or stolen by one of his generals, General Ptolemy, because it was believed that whoever has the body of Alexander will be the successor. So Ptolemy, one of the strongest generals to succeed Alexander, got hold of the body when it was being taken for public viewing. It was hijacked or kidnapped, and he kept the body in his possession. On the other hand, Jesus, as we all know, died at Calvary, almost at the same age of Alexander, 33, and he was buried uh, in the borrowed grave of Joseph of Arimathea. And about his death, we read in Revelation 1:18, where it says, I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. As we know, Jesus lives. Alexander is in his resting place. As we talked about Alexander's body being kidnapped, we also know that something similar happened to Jesus, that it was claimed that the body of Jesus has been stolen. We know it wasn't. Jesus rose from the dead, but Alexander's body was indeed stolen, and it was said or falsely proclaimed that body of Jesus was also stolen. We read it in Matthew chapter 28, verses 12 to 13, where the Pharisees and the Roman rulers, they try to make a conspiracy theory that the body was stolen by the disciples. They even bribed the soldiers to make such a claim. What's the legacy of Alexander and Jesus? Well, the legacy of Alexander. Alexander named around 70 cities after his own name. He built and rebuilt many cities. He built 4 huge metropolitans, one of them known by his own name, Alexandria. And it's very interesting to note that he also built a city which he named after his horse, after his favorite and beloved horse, Bucephala. Um, and interestingly, this city was built at the bank of Hadaspes River, which is now called Jhelum River, which is in Pakistan, and the city also Jhelum is in Pakistan. But interestingly, it's noteworthy that this city was basically initially built in the memory of the favorite horse of Alexander, Bucephala, and that's what he named the city after. Later, it was changed to Jhelum. The legacy of Jesus, as we already seen, the legacy of Jesus is not an earthly legacy. The legacy of Jesus lives in his message. Something interesting happened at Tyre when Alexander was at the height of his conquest. As we know, Tyre is mentioned in the Bible, and it's prophesied that Tyre would be conquered and attacked by a mighty king. We read in Zechariah chapter 9, from verse 3 onwards, it says, Tyre has built herself a rampart, and heaped up silver like dust, and fine gold like the mud of the streets. But later, in verse 5, it says, the king shall perish from Gaza, and Tyre also will be destroyed. So let's look at what happened at Tyre and then at Gaza. After defeating and routing many kings in different parts of the world, Alexander headed to Tyre first and then to Gaza. Alexander believed that he was son of Hercules, son of Zeus, and therefore he was descendant of gods, the Greek gods. There was a temple in Tyre, temple of Hercules. Alexander had desire to go there and offer sacrifice to his ancestors, believing himself to be one of the sons of those gods. The king of Tyre refused to allow Alexander the entry and privilege to come and give sacrifice in the temple. This enraged Alexander, and he made up his mind that he's going to attack Tyre. 70,000 plus women and children were made to leave the place before Alexander made the vicious attack. 40,000 remaining men fought tooth and nail, but couldn't resist the rage and fury of the army of Alexander. Finally, Tyre was destroyed, burnt to ashes. The walls were broken. The city was destroyed, just as it was said and written in the Bible. But the question is, had something missed out? Had this not happened, the prophecy in the Bible would have been falsified. But as it was written, so did it happen. Later, from here, Alexander headed towards Gaza. The ruler of Gaza, the king of Gaza, made the same mistake. He did not heed to the warning of Alexander to surrender and decided to face Alexander. It wasn't a problem for Alexander. Alexander took Gaza in no time. The siege of Gaza took place in 332 BC. 10,000 men were slaughtered, women and children were spared, but later were taken as slaves. The ruler had to flee, but was captured, and Alexander tied him to his horse and dragged him throughout the city. Gaza's destruction, also predicted in the Bible, was fulfilled word by word. Alexander slaughtered over 10,000 people in Gaza, as we have seen in Zechariah 9 and chapter 9 verse 5. It says, "The king shall perish from Gaza." Exactly, this is what happened. From Gaza, Alexander headed to Jerusalem. But something very marvelous and fascinating happened in Jerusalem. The people of Jerusalem were scared to death. They were terrified about Alexander's conquest, and they knew he was coming for them. But we read in the Antiquities of the Jews, written by Flavius Josephus, one of the greatest historians. Josephus writes that when Alexander came to Jerusalem, the priest met him, welcomed him, and showed him the prophecies about him as they were written in Daniel. Alexander was fascinated. He was flabbergasted. He was overjoyed to see his name, his mention in the prophecy. And therefore, he spared Jerusalem and the Jews and let them have their own way. He left them in status quo and departed in peace. The high priest Jaddua, speaking in behalf of the people, requested Alexander to spare them the collection of taxes, because they had promised to send all the taxes to the king of Persia. Alexander even didn't mind that, and he let them continue with that practice and left Jerusalem in peace. Thus, people of God, the city of God, was spared the wrath and fury of Alexander the Great. Alexander had last 3 wishes when he was dying. He made known his 3 wishes. He knew he was dying. There was no way he was going to make it. So he made 3 last wishes. First, he said, "My desire is that my physicians alone must carry my coffin. Second, I desire that when my coffin is being carried to the grave, the path leading to the graveyard be strewn with gold, silver, and precious stones, which I have in my collection and in my treasury. Third, Alexander said, my third and last wish is that both my hands be kept dangling out of my coffin when my body is being carried through the streets. The listeners were surprised, confused at these three strange wishes. Seeing their confusion, Alexander clarified. He said, I want my physicians to carry my body so that the world may know that when death comes, when death strikes, no physician, no doctor, no medicine can help. My second wish, my path of my coffin should be strewn with precious stones and gold and silver, so that people may see that when death comes, no amount of money, gold, wealth, or silver, or treasuries will save you. My third wish, keep my hands dangling out of my coffin. I want the world to know Alexander the Great, who conquered the whole world, leaves this world empty-handed. How about Jesus? What was the last wish of Jesus? If you want to read what was the last wish of Jesus, read John chapter 17. The whole chapter describes what Jesus wished, what he wishes. John chapter 14, 1 to 3 also is worth noting what Jesus wished. He said, my desire is that you, my believers, my children, spend eternity with me, that where I am, ye also be. That was the wish, and that is the wish of our Lord Jesus Christ. There is no comparison between Alexander and Jesus. As a matter of fact, there is no comparison of anyone with Jesus, any ruler, any conqueror, anyone, whosoever, because Jesus did not belong to this world. He wasn't an ordinary man. He was God in the form of man. There is no comparison with Jesus. Not at all. God bless you. Peace of Jesus Christ be with you.